Hey, I'm Pat. Welcome to Daily Devo. Today we're going to talk about the sound of a rooster. If you grew up in a rural setting on or around a farm or have done any international travel to a third world country especially, you've probably experienced the sound of roosters. It's one of the sounds I remember hearing every single morning as I traveled in Uganda and Rwanda. Let me help you if you can't quite imagine the sound. There was a guy named Peter that probably never forgot that sound, the sound of a rooster. Perhaps you remember the story. As Jesus and his disciples, not counting Judas, he's already left, but as Jesus and his 11 remaining disciples are leaving Jerusalem and dropping down in the Kidron Valley and walking up the side of the Mount of Olives, Jesus turns to them and tells them that they're all going to fail him, betray him that night. And Peter begins to boast and he says, "Never! I would die for you before I would betray you, Jesus." And Jesus looks at Peter and says, "Peter, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And sure enough, Jesus is eventually arrested. And as he's going through the trials that night, Peter is confronted 3 different times. And 3 different times, he'll deny Jesus. And then he hears the rooster crow. But that's not where the story ends for Peter. You see, Jesus died and he rose from the dead. And then for the next 40 days, he makes numerous resurrection appearances. One of them was on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. It's a great story found in John chapter 21. It's actually one of my favorites, and I mean it this time. Read it later. What you'll find in this amazing story is that Jesus pulls off another miracle for these guys. Then Peter realizes it's Jesus actually on the shore, so he takes a swim to meet him. They have this conversation, Jesus and Peter, they have this conversation on the beach that you really need to read about. But in that conversation, Jesus does something significant. Watch this. In John chapter 21, I'm reading verses 15 through 17. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time, he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" A third time. Don't miss that. I don't think it was an accident that Jesus asked Peter 3 times. He didn't ask him once. He didn't ask him twice. He didn't ask him 4 times. He asked him 3 times. How many times had Peter denied Jesus? 3 times. Among other things that Jesus was doing in this conversation with Peter, he was telling him, "Peter, you failed. You're forgiven. Now move on." Oh, what words of hope. Not just for Peter, but for you and me. Because we've all failed and will fail again in the future. And God's message to you and me is the same as it was to Peter. You failed, you're forgiven. Now move on. You see, there's a big difference between living in the past and living with the past. Let me say that again. There's a big difference between living in the past and living with the past. Peter needed to learn that. And so do we. It makes me wonder, as Peter lived out the rest of his life, what he thought when he heard the sound of a rooster. For you and me, maybe this sound, maybe that sound, the sound of a rooster, can always hold this reminder that at times you and I will fail, but because of God's great mercy and grace, that failure doesn't have to be the end of our story.